All right, welcome everybody. So glad to have you here to the next edition in the Notary Governance and Filecoin Plus community calls. We still have a couple of people popping in. So Kayray, I'm going to ask, we can trade off as we're presenting. Yeah, just to kick things off, so good to see everybody here. As usual, we've got a slide deck. We'll cover some of the issues that have been open for a while that need some follow-up. We'll talk a little bit about some new issues. But before we get into that, we actually have a couple of updates. And so I'm going to share my screen and just kick things off here. Okay, March 16th, just shortly after Pi Day. Hopefully you had some pie a couple of days ago. I guess that only counts in this daytime format. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about content and then some updates from the notary front, especially from at least what I've seen. And then if anybody else has anything to contribute if you're a notary, and then talk through the issues that have been open. So first up, Filecoin Plus content. I'm going to hand it over to Kayray if you want to give us a quick update on some of the stuff you've been doing.
Yeah, warm, friendly hello. So 2 points to really put on everyone's radar. The first has to do with how we're recording these meetings. So in the past, we were using Zoom's cloud. The only problem with that is there's an expiration date on it we weren't quite aware of. So if you check the Notary repo, you're going to notice that the only last 2 meetings are hung for historical purposes. So going forward, what we're going to do is we're going to capture these meetings. We're going to be hanging them on the Filecoin YouTube page. There's a dedicated playlist called the Notaries that we have set up. You can see the link there. And if you're keen, I can share that after this chat into the link that we have for the announcement. The second thing that's a little bit more pressing for the community is we noticed that there's common questions that seem to come up. So for the last couple of weeks, what we did is we gathered all of those questions that have been incoming, and we put them into one centralized FAQ. These were issues that were coming from the Notary repo itself, or some of the more common ones that we saw in the Filecoin Plus Slack channel. We're going to open this up for community feedback because these were the issues that we saw that we were spending time on a lot. We want to make sure that it's addressing what the community is also seeing. So in the coming days, you might notice that link gets posted. We're very open to feedback. So any questions that you might have had when you got started or that you've been asked that you wish that you had just a quick link and repo to go forward. So stand by and you'll see the videos coming in the next couple of days, as well as the FAQ in the next couple of days. Back to you, Dee.
Cool. I just want to make another plug that, in general, educating the community, improving the quality of the content that exists is an ongoing journey for all of us. So if you have ideas, if you've got time, please, feel free to start a thread on the Filecoin Plus channel and Slack. Share your ideas, your thoughts, and things that we can all contribute towards and improve. As more people enter this ecosystem, more people need to get educated about how Filecoin Plus works and are curious to get involved. As some of you may remember, we also were looking at the idea of having like a Filecoin Plus Day Summit type thing at some point. That idea is still very much on the books, and we're going to be doing some planning. And hopefully, I'll have some more tactical updates to share in the next Notary Governance call on how we can get closer towards that. Cool. So that's it on the content front. Unless anybody else has anything they'd like to share, gonna give 10 seconds to anybody in the room if they have any ideas they want to bring up right now. Cool. Let's keep going. So on the notaries front, a couple of things that have been flagged or are being flagged actively in the channel, as well as just on GitHub and in the last Notary Governance call. The first is that both Masaki and Stone are actually currently blocked on being able to make DataCap allocations. So I think Masaki, we need to rotate your address to the right one. And then for Stone, it looks like DataCap wasn't allocated correctly in the first pass. So I'll be helping both of you to make sure that that happens. And we'll be working with the Kiko team as well as anybody else who can help validate the flow just to ensure that things are happening correctly. This was, of course, the first time that we were doing DataCap allocations, I think, to Notary. So it's quite possible that something trivial was missed. And so we'll go through and do an audit and ensure that these are corrected. As far as I'm aware, neither of you have, as a result, allocated any of your DataCap. And of course, in general, we've often talked about DataCap liquidity being a thing we want to improve in the ecosystem. And so this should hopefully enable at least 2 more notaries to get going. As far as I'm aware, no other notaries have issues with allocating DataCap. Please flag if that is not the case. And let's make sure we get that addressed as soon as possible. The second was something that came up last week, which was Fleek asked to be removed as a notary. They found that they didn't have the bandwidth to be contributing and following client applications. And so we had a discussion at the last Notary Governance call that we agreed to set their data cap allocation to 0, and Fleek would effectively be removed without like additional penalty. So effectively, if they do want to be a notary again in the future, they just have to reapply, and they would go through the entire like rubric and scoring process just like any other notary would, as like an independent application without this historical context. So this was based on a discussion that we had in the last governance call. Of course, not everybody in this room today was in that last governance call. And so I just wanted to share those updates and also open up the floor for any additional comments or thoughts if anybody had any on either of these. Masaki, I know you're in the call today as well. If you want to share anything on your end, or if you're good to go, that'd be great as well.
Hi, Deep. Yes. Thank you. I'm good.
Well, that bought me enough time for a sip of coffee, so I appreciate it. Nice to have you here. Sweet. So the next thing I briefly want to bring up was like just in general this data cap application side of things, where in the last couple of calls there's been a theme where like allocations themselves may not be going out as fast as ideal. And of course, the steps that a client goes through today, like unless they're going to an automated verifier to actually end up with data cap in their account, are non-trivial. It often requires like a lot of interaction. Client has to understand and learn what data cap is, navigate the right website, make an application. Then a notary has to send them whatever appropriate due diligence is required. A client may then go do additional research and come back with answers. This back and forth can happen n number of times until the notary decides that, yeah, this client is bringing a valuable use case to Filecoin. They deserve some amount of data cap, and then that data cap gets allocated. And so one of the themes that has been ongoing in various angles, and this has come both from notaries, but also from clients, as well as from miners who are all looking for more data cap liquidity in the system, is that it's a pretty slow process. And so Andrew Hill actually brought up this idea of like having like time to data cap as a thing that we could track together as a community, and we could work towards improving, whether that's using it as a guiding principle for figuring out how we can increase transparency on how the process is actually going down, whether we can use it as a method of knowing when to add more notaries, for example, or as a metric for like measuring like data cap flow, so we know that like the ecosystem is serving or not serving like the needs of the clients that are entering. And even as a metric for as simple as like figuring out when issues are getting stale in the repo, like applications in the client onboarding repo, for example. And so Andrew, I know you've opened up, I think you're on the call. I know you opened up 2 specific issues to chat about this. So I'm going to have you, unmute and talk about them as soon as we get to that slide. But I did want to just raise this as like an ongoing topic for you folks to ruminate over as we get to that part of the conversation. The thing that I did want to have a little bit of a conversation about right now was also just in general, like the perspective from the notaries on data cap fluidity. So in past conversations, we did have some clients talk about like bringing in data cap taking a while for them. And I know that's still been an ongoing issue, especially as some notaries are also reaching their like caps of the first round of data cap that they were given to allocate. I did want to hear from notaries that have still a substantive amount of data cap to allocate that aren't blocked, so not Masaki or Stone, but for those of you that still have a decent amount of data cap left to allocate, if you're seeing any patterns, if you're seeing anything emerging that would help as guidance or serve as just general advice and suggestions to the community of clients out there in how they reach you and how they're able to apply to data cap, whether that's like how they structure an application or how much data cap they ask for. Wanted to open up the floor to the notaries in this call for a couple of minutes to share some perspective and insights. Feel free to just unmute and share an opinion if you have one. Neo, I see you laughing. I can't see the chat, so I don't know what's happening in the back, but if you have something to share, it'd be great. If not, I think we can also keep going. This is not particularly controversial anymore. I think most of the issues have.
Yeah, I think one of the things I could share is like for me as a notary, like not so many clients trying to apply, DataCap from me. So that's kind of the reason why I still have a lot of DataCap handy. And but I would say it really depends on the clients. If the clients doesn't want to apply from me, then I'm not intend to reach out to them and say, hey, do you want any DataCap? But I would say probably it's not really client friendly. Like I'm talking about, like, probably it's complicated. Like my process is kind of complicated to them to apply, or I'm thinking about if there's anything I could improve to make it easy for the clients to apply DataCap from. So that's just kind of question both to you guys and to myself as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, which is just sort of generally opening up the platform to get some feedback, right? As a notary, to see how we can continue to optimize and improve, reduce friction, but also increase the quality of the work that we're all doing here together to build a productive ecosystem. I don't know if anybody has any specific feedback or any follow-up thoughts to that. Probably give a couple of seconds to see if anybody wants to share. Yeah, Andrew dropped in the chat that it would be the same as what was mentioned last call, which would be, it would be great to bump up the automated data cap from 8 gigabytes to something more substantive. Andrew, I believe you opened up an issue, which we will be discussing, I think 2 slides from now, on bumping it up to 32 gigabytes. So let's definitely take some time in this call to talk about that. Cool. I'm going to head to the next slide based on this. Thanks, Neo, for sharing. As always, folks, this is an open ecosystem, an open community. Always great to hear feedback, always great to work together to iterate to make this more effective, to ensure Filecoin Plus does deliver its value on bringing useful data to Filecoin and ensuring that Filecoin can serve the world in a productive way. So we have a set of issues that we flagged as the new issues that came up in the last call that I wanted to touch on and just see if there were any updates in thinking. So the first one was basically on the Fat Man opened up an issue on a huge data cap discrepancy between first-time applicants in China versus the rest of the world. The conversation we had on the previous notary governance call was that fundamentally this is still up to the notaries and how they choose to distribute and allocate data cap to clients that they find to be trustworthy or ones that align with their process of due diligence. And so I don't think Fat Man is in this call. Did want to make a call out nonetheless that this could be an interesting point of feedback for some of the notaries that are operating in China, for example, specifically, or just in other regions that may not have the same rate of data cap allocation. Just flag and think about ways in which maybe the minimum the minimum amount of data cap that's being allocated maybe could be higher or things like that. And it's also important to note that, of course, this is the first time we're testing this system in many ways. This was the first batch of notaries that were elected, the first time like data cap was allocated to notaries and now is flowing to clients and then minors. And so we're all here to learn and improve the system together. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think there was any additional follow-up on this issue. Just wanted to check with the room in case there's anybody that has any additional opinions that they wanted to share here. If not, I also want to use this as like an opportunity for us to start bringing issues to resolution. So like if we agree that we are all on the same page and generally there's no like actual action items or changes that need to be proposed, we should be able to together agree through GitHub or through these calls to close things out. And so this would be an issue that I would propose, I think is ready for closing unless there are other opinions that have not yet been voiced. Cool. Feel free to share on GitHub as well. It's not going to be like an instant action to close something out, but it's just something to think about as we improve the operational practices that we all have in Filecoin Plus as well. Cool. The second thing that we talked about for quite a while in the previous notary governance call, for those of you that weren't there, was on this idea of having some kind of process for really, really large, like massive use cases, which I loosely have been defining as like data cap required to be greater than 1 PB, for example. So a great example of this is like Starling Labs' work and what they're doing with the Shoah Foundation to upload some of the refugee testimonial like interviews that they've been doing onto Filecoin. This is like a multi-PEVI project. It is improbable to think, I think the case being made in this issue is basically that it's improbable that a single notary or even many notaries coming together would have the data cap in the medium term to serve the needs of use cases of this size. But at the same time, I believe most notaries are in agreement that use cases like this are defensively valuable and should be served by Filecoin Plus. And so this issue, which is specifically issue 94, discusses this idea of maybe having like a sort of a faucet that's dedicated to a client that's been vetted by many notaries and is constantly checked by a notary in the form of maybe like a multi-sig that can allocate data cap to that particular client over time. And so, it looks like JV is actually here. JV, do you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, sorry, I'm outside. I think like the high level to this one is there's a number of use cases that like are on our radar that will need super large allocations. And right now, like the default process is basically to have like the client go to like every notary and ask for data cap. And like that could happen, but what it'll do is it basically will just drain every notary, like the Show Foundation, with the size of the allocation that they'll need. They'll talk to every notary, they'll use up all the data cap that's in the ecosystem, and that's just going to throttle everyone. And so I think there is one path where we do that. I think something that like may be less disruptive is especially for these super large allocations. I think in order for this to like work, we should write up like a full PR of like the proposal and then have people look at that. But I think like the rough structure would be, we define a process where like separate from like normal notary applications, like a project can apply to like the community. Hopefully the barrier to entry is like much higher because like it'll have to go through something in this like governance call so that people can like approve or disapprove or call out like potential risks. There's like an allocation plan that like client should already have sort of like defined of like how are they going to allocate the data cap and like what sort of strategy. And then ideally the data cap allocation is made into like a multi-sig and it can be the existing notaries and we can figure out like what number of notaries and like is it like all of them have to like sign to like allocate data cap out from that multi-sig to the client. But hopefully that sort of creates a parallel pathway where it doesn't actually like disrupt other clients trying to get access to data cap, but still enables like these big use cases to be supported. So that's like the high level idea.
Any thoughts on that? Megan, I know you plus one that in chat, but if there's any other opinions and thoughts immediately, it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, just saying, like, I think that's a good call. And like, I think that for a lot of these projects, like we know that they're coming in advance, you know, like especially like Starling's like getting funding from the foundation. And so I think things that are coming through, at least like channels related to the, you know, to things like the foundation, we can have them approximate the amount of data that they're going to use and, you know, bring it up in this kind of process.
Yeah, that makes sense. Generally, I think that like we'll probably have like a few of these. I don't think there's going to be like a multitude, but there's definitely going to be probably a handful of clients and use cases for massive deployments like this, especially given like the value that Filecoin can add to the world in this manner. So I think having like a proven art path for this makes a lot of sense. Having a client go and drain the data cap allocation of like every single notary doesn't make as much sense because it would just speed up the rate at which we need to do allocations to individual notaries. We'd also have to do a bunch of like rounds of additional like elections, for example, for notaries. And so this could help reduce like the friction for that client substantively, but also increase additional use case diversity and increase like the usefulness of each like notary when they're elected to serve as a notary without having to apply like all of their data cap towards like a single client, for example. So yeah, I'm definitely in support of doing something like this. I don't know what it's going to look like. And so I think JV's proposed next step of sort of fleshing out what that PR might actually look like or how things might actually change is probably a good one. Any other thoughts on this? I see the chat. Wynand, I know you can't come off mute, so I'm just going to read out your chat. You said, should you guys perhaps consider this recurring data cap together with this? I don't know the current state of that, but it should be less work to renew. So I believe, Wynand, you're referencing the FIP, right? Which is currently to help like client addresses get refreshed instead of a client having to supply a new address.
Correct.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, I do see why it would make sense to consider them as related, because theoretically, a massive client who wants to get topped up would probably want to get topped up at a similar set of client addresses instead of continuously making even more and more addresses. So I do think that they're related. I don't think there's necessarily a dependency, unless I'm misinterpreting where you're coming from. I think you're on the same page.
Yeah, the thing is, if like 14 people have to decide on this data cap, the renewal should not take 14 people to decide again. Takes a long time.
So I think in my imaginary construction of how this might work, basically, sorry, there's like trains near me too now. I think the way that this would work is the client sort of like predefines a lot of like the general strategy. And then I think it's as simple as like the client would need to submit back deals or like deal info. And then the 14 people, like, it's not like they have to submit a new application, because like their original thing to the community was for like the full 100 petabytes or whatever. And so you can sort of think of it like, I don't know, like a trust that's making like small allocations out to that, like to that recipient. And so all you have to do is like prove that you've like done the thing that you said according to your allocation plan. And so I think like the main work for something like the Shoah Foundation would be like using it as like a sample starting case and like building out like frameworks to make it easy for like other clients in the future to like also replicate. And so maybe that's something that we'll have to figure out. But I think for future clients, hopefully it's like pretty, and maybe even for Filecoin Discover, we can do the same thing. But like, it's basically like just predefine like the full strategy of like, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna do it? Like the people, the notaries controlling the multi-sig, I think it's just like making it super trivial for them to just check to see like, did you do the thing that you sort of claimed? And I think that's just as simple as like defining a spec for like, what is the deal info that has to be posted? And then if there's an easy way of like having that map to like the strategy that they defined.
Yeah, I think one thing that like I'd be curious to hear opinion from is from the community on would basically be, when we talk about like a multi-sig or we talk about a set of notaries that would sort of approve this and then be like the custodians of this, should it be like an encompassing group of notaries where it's like every single notary, for example, is on this multi-sig that's currently elected? Or would it be like the set of notaries in the region? Or would it be like randomly selected or volunteered set of notaries, like based on an application? Like, how should we go about like thinking, like, are there any opinions, instead to rephrase that a little better, are there any opinions on how notaries would like to be grouped and exposed to a data cap faucet of this sort for a massive client? Okay, JB, you're proposing based on scale and increment. So like something like the number of petabytes of data cap requested would result in a certain number of notaries that would need to volunteer to be on the thing.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I think the high level is like, basically what's the surface area for risk? And so like, if we're talking about like a multi-petabyte like allocation, it probably requires like at least a couple people to like verify. Because like at the end of the day, if we're thinking about like is the gameability of this, you want like it to be sufficiently hard where it's like multiple people have to like be compromised, right? And so I don't know. It may also be the case that like we say that there's like no scale at which this is like reasonable, or like they have to go through like application again for like another big trustee thing, or trust is the wrong term here, like multi-sig application. But like I think it's something that we should probably define in like whatever spec thing we come up for this.
Yeah. Any other notaries on the call that have an opinion on how they'd like to participate in something like this? Like, do you envision yourself volunteering to be part of a group of like 7 others, for example, or 6 others, so we have an odd number for consensus? Or would you expect like an explicit application to you and then you'd sign on to a multi-sig? Okay, I'm going to assume people have some wonderful ideas that they're going to share on GitHub as we start to make progress on what like this could look like from a spec perspective or implementation. I'd also be curious to hear if there's anybody that disagrees with doing something like this, because we've had a lot of people share that they are in agreement and that like this would be useful. But of course, if somebody has feedback that this is not necessarily something we should be looking at, I'd be curious to hear that, and I'm sure that would be worthwhile for the community to talk about.
Not to jump in for actual notaries, but it would definitely be nice, like from the side of the foundation, because we will have things that we know are coming up in the future. So and we've already done like a fair amount of work to like vet the project. So just to be able to like preempt that and like get the quorum of notaries together in advance, you know, so that so that these like large projects are not coming in and throwing people off and it's sucking up all the data cap.
Yeah, I think +1 in favor of it still, right? Though, Megan, I guess from your perspective though, like as somebody who's seen like multiple applications that this could be useful for, do you see like a slice that we could use to inform the notary selection process for it? Like, are they typically bounded by geography, for example? Because, you know, notaries today exist in different regions of operation. Or would you envision like or is it just that they're typically much more global and disparate, and so we should just think of a different way in which we would elect notaries to be part of the multi-sig?
Currently, the stuff that we're dealing with is mostly US based, but we're also pretty early in the process of getting projects together. So I think that will likely change kind of towards the end of this year. But that's the current situation.
Cool, that makes sense. In the interest of like getting to the other topics, I'm going to time box the conversation on this here. But I think issue number 94 is where the conversation was started. Would love to see some follow-ups there, and we can continue iterating together as a community on like how this could get implemented. The last bit is on some conversations that have evolved over the last couple of months on like self-dealing relationships that exist in this complicated ecosystem. Specifically, we had talked about issue 98 last time, which was on when somebody applies as a client but is also a minor, like to what extent should they be allowed to make deals with themselves? And so there were opinions presented, and there was some good conversation on issue 98 a couple of weeks ago. We then discussed it in the call 2 weeks ago, but since then there hasn't been as much discussion. However, Riba Sushi actually shared some analysis that he was able to do earlier today, which should hopefully be another great step in just general data cap transparency and like the work that's going into building better tooling for this ecosystem. So I wanted to bring up this issue again, mostly so that he could share some of his analysis and see if anybody was interested in taking that forward, especially on the notary side, as it may inform your future allocation decisions as well. Riba, if you're comfortable, we'd love to have you take over screen share and just walk us through how you what you've done and how you did it.
Yeah, totally. Cool. So based on like a number of conversations that have been happening recently, I put together a very, very simple analyzer of field plus deal data. This is a simple script that will run on pretty much any Linux machine that pulls data from the nodes provided by Glyph for us. It is basically all the verified deals that are updated every 10 minutes, and then we query their node to resolve like addresses and all this kind of stuff. And I sourced all the requests for DataCap from both the current GitHub registry and the older one in Kiko. And additionally, I sourced associations between miner and owner of this miner from both like Filecoin Slack and our miner cohort and stuff like that. And the result of this are 2 CSVs. This was ran literally an hour ago. So now if you can open the client first. So this is a CSV that has every client that we currently have involved in field plus deals. And if you scroll into this further down, further. Yeah, whenever I don't know who that is, it says basically new unknown, and they're kind of all lumped together. But as a whole, this is a spreadsheet that tells you for each individual client how much data are they totally storing, and then towards the right, all the miners in sorted by size with which they're storing this data, and the percentages where they're, how the breakdown works. And this entire spreadsheet is obviously sortable, and you can figure out what to do with that if you are interested in figuring out both how much a particular client has already used and how much they're kind of honoring this decentralization principle and so on and so forth. And on the other side, if you can open the other CSV, the same analysis is done from a perspective of miner, where basically I take all the miners that currently store fill plus deals. I throw away any miner that has less than 1 terabyte of fill plus data. And then the remainder is, again, the CSV, where we have the miner, their owner, and all of those unknowns are things that I would love to fill up. I just don't have the information for them. And then to the right is which are the clients that are storing with this miner, and again, they're like percentages, just like in the other spreadsheet. So yeah, that's pretty much the entire repository. You can totally run this yourself, and it will regenerate the CSVs for you on the fly. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Awesome. I think this is also a great opportunity for us to do the usual plug of, on this journey of increasing DataCap fluidity, transparency, et cetera, in the ecosystem. If you have any ideas, if there are projects that you're interested in working in, please feel free to share your ideas with the community, get started with working. I know Philip at one point had mentioned that the foundation also has some grants to help with some of this stuff. Megan or Clara, I don't know if you know what the latest is on that, but in case there's still like funding available to help people who want to build interesting tooling in the ecosystem, I think it's still an option. And so we'd love to encourage and continue to encourage that in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely have funding available. And truthfully, if there's anything that you're seeing that you think might be useful, like that's how broad a net it is. Feel free to come to us for a developer grant.
Yeah, so normally we give developer grants, as you guys are all aware, every quarter. And so right now is a good time for us as we're thinking about our next wave of grants. So if there's new ideas that you guys have, this is exactly the right place where we're here to really make sure we can fund the right tools. So definitely just contact us directly, or you can just say team@file.org, which comes to all of us. And we can kind of figure out from there how to make the best ideas available in RFPs for our next grant cycle.
Cool, thank you. I don't want to spend too much time on this issue because I think we've been having quite a bit of conversation in Slack on it as well. But if you do have an opinion, please feel free to hop into GitHub and we can continue providing updates in upcoming Notary governance calls. All right, so with that, let's talk a little bit about the new issues. So the first thing, I sort of lumped them. I took the liberty of lumping them into 3 different categories. The first one is specific to this concept of like improving like time to DataCap for clients that are interested in getting DataCap. So there are 3 different issues, all of them filed by Andrew Hill. So I think the easiest thing to do is actually just open the floor to Andrew if he's still here. If you want to chat through these, that would be awesome. If not, I can do that as well.
Yeah, sure. So the first one I already mentioned in chat, pretty basic, but the Fill Plus notaries are reviewing applications from first-time applicants. And especially if they're an individual, not associated with an organization, it's hard to have any rubric that's going to give them a substantial data cap to use. And that even counts for organizations that are new. So you imagine projects going through incubators, things like that. 8 gigabytes is what's given out from the Glyph project. And all you have to do is verify with a GitHub account. It seems like 8 gigabytes is like nice, but not very meaningful for real experimentation and projects on Filecoin, especially if you're going to use it for DataCap things where you might want to try recurring deals, try different miners. So anyway, that's just a proposal to allow them, I don't even know if they'll be willing to, but allow them to grant larger DataCap for first-time users, sort of just lift the first rung for those people so that then they can apply for larger DataCaps and use their distribution of that initial DataCap as credibility on the network. So that's that one. Do you want me to stop for some discussion? Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I think we should.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I like changed my mind halfway. Probably better to do this issue by issue.
Okay.
So yeah, if anybody has any ideas or thoughts on this, please feel free to share. I know Wynand, you played around with the verified glyph initially, and you found that the 8 GB was also like a little too low for your testing. And I know you're in the audience. If you think 32 would have been better, it'd be nice to hear that. If there are any other opinions, let's open the floor for 30 seconds.
Well, yeah, 8 GB is really too low. If you want to send out a deal or a few deals, I guess 32 would make more sense.
Yeah, I'm curious. Is anyone like? I think the one thing that's weird is like, in the original Notary applications, we said that people would be like judged based on their like predefined strategy and how well they execute against that. It feels like I don't know if anyone has opposition, but it does feel like, or most people at least are sort of flagging that like it would be better if we could increase this. And I'm also of that opinion. I know I've been talking to some of the minor X folks about like their minimum like deal size, and like especially if clients are supposed to store like multiple copies, so like 4 copies of their data, like a 2 GB file like will just not get stored because it like doesn't make sense for most people. So like is anyone opposed? Maybe we have to like define a process here for like amending. Maybe we could get Jonathan Schwartz to like file an issue saying like, I'd like to amend my strategy to like bump up the size. And then if someone has an issue that's not on this call, they could respond to it. But it feels like generally, I don't know if anyone is opposed, but.
So there is someone in chat says 8 is fine. If you need more, apply for DataCap. Otherwise, it's incentive to cheat, if you ask me. And this actually points to something I think I mentioned in my issue, which is, well, I'm not going to read it all right now, but I also agree with that sentiment that before we jump into this, I don't really know any strong analysis of like what can be gamed here. Like at what level is this too gameable, you know? So is it 32 GB or is it 8 GB? I don't actually know the distinction between the two in the eyes of the network. And so it may just take a little bit of like justification from somebody and before we, and so that might be Jonathan Schwartz. Do they even want to do this? And can they rewrite it with some justification why 32 GB might be better if they're up for it?
Yeah, I think that's a fairly valid point. I did see what you added to the issue as well, that like it would take a lot of effort for somebody to even at like 32 GB, like make a significant dent in the network or like do a lot of like nefarious like activity, because the bar is still relatively high, right? Like that you need to have a GitHub account that was around for a year, and like it's obvious and easy to audit that.
Yeah, I did put that in the GitHub issue, which you'd need 32,000 fake GitHub accounts to create a petabyte of deals if we raise the bar to 32 GB.
Yeah. So
for me, that doesn't seem incredibly gameable. In fact, we could even possibly go higher, but that might be why that analysis could be nice. Yeah. Maybe 30 GB is cutting this short or not at all. But either way, I feel like as somebody, I'm experimenting with non-verified wallets all the time, and I feel like I would like a faster route. So I also want the renewable DataCap, but then also just being able to get more on the first try would be really helpful for doing experiments. So
yeah, I think there's another angle here as well, which is like we can experiment and get it wrong and then correct it as well. Like I don't think these things are like that they don't have that much permanence. Like if for example, like Jonathan Schwartz wants to try 32 because we're all sort of saying that this could help, like developers, or this could help testing, we could try 32 for a week. And if it looks like it's actually not good and it's not promoting good activity, I think, we as a community can also like flag that and influence that down the line. But I do agree that the right next step is probably for Jonathan Schwartz to see if this is something he's interested in doing. And if so, probably file an issue, because that would be changing like fundamentally like what his initial notary application looked like. Because I think that he was granted DataCap specifically for like automatically like granting like 8 gigabytes. So probably the next step is to have a discussion on an issue that he creates.
I'll ping him on that issue, because I don't even know if he's aware of it. I was actually just looking for general sentiment. So I think that's good. Nice to see some people in chat have some concerns. So let's just explore it a little bit, and maybe next call we have another update. So the next issue I had was 103. Right, and so this is about criteria for removing inactive notaries. I think it's just a bad position for the notaries and for the network in general if we have notaries that are approved that then don't move DataCap. And that could be from a lot of different reasons. So this one needs some more thought, but I just wanted to get some input here. In particular, notaries that are approved and then have open applications, but don't grant a single DataCap in some amount of time, it seems clear that they're blocking DataCap. And so I think we should be proactive on removing them. And then some reasons why that might happen, that we might want to have ways for them to not get blocked, are the people on the call you already mentioned, whose addresses whose notary addresses were actually messed up. They just need a way to get around that and get more time. But other ones that are just piling up issues on GitHub, I think it's a really bad user experience. And I think we should aim to unblock those users by moving the tickets or moving their applications as quickly as possible to notaries that aren't blocking it.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear if there's actually other notaries on this call that have an opinion on that. And of course, the conversation can continue in GitHub after the call as well. But yeah, I agree. I remember that there was also this like topic that came up at some point on, do we just want to have tickets be reassigned between notaries? But I think the outcome of that conversation was basically that is not necessarily good, assuming notaries are sticking to some of their original ideas of serving particular use cases or serving particular regions. However, this at least gives like a really clear path for a client who might feel like they're just stuck and not like seeing traction on like their application, where like notaries are now going to be held to a bar of responsiveness in a way, which then enables like clients to get DataCap that they like should may deserve, basically, at a more like reliable speed.
Yeah, for me, it's just that if we all want Filecoin to be successful and this ends up being the first thing that a user hits, it's a shame if it takes them 3 weeks to be able to use the network, when really we want them using it in the first hours or day. So it's very related to issue 100, but going further. So what are the next steps there? Because I'm even proposing criteria for that.
Yeah.
This actually relates to 104, which is maybe with new notaries, we could set up these criteria before they even join, but what do we do now?
I think it's probably worth having the conversation in GitHub a little bit to ensure everybody's opinions being heard. And so the tactical next step I would recommend would probably be to drop it into Slack and say, hey, like, curious to hear if anybody doesn't agree with these criteria or if these are not like good criteria. I think one of the interesting implications of what you were proposing would also be like the removal of notaries like down the line that haven't necessarily finished allocating all of their DataCap. And like that's an interesting one, because then we have to, I think we do need to have a conversation on, this is not a full-time job for a notary. And so what are the implications of being held to like an SLA of some sort, for example?
Well, should notaries just automatically expire? Like, should I just expire in a year and have to reapply even if I already had DataCap that I didn't deploy? That seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Are there any other opinions?
Perhaps a separate thing that's related to a different point that Andrew made, which is like, I think like another thing, and maybe this is like worth dev granting, though maybe I'll file an issue, and if other people have thoughts, we can like brainstorm. It does seem like getting to that point of like clients can get some data cap like within the first hour or something like super trivial implies that we need like other ways of like verifying people like automatically, which means you have to come up with like more strategies for this. Like the GitHub one is like one that's like good, but like maybe we need like more. And so that might be another way where like we could change the balance of like what manual review is required versus like things that can be automatically reviewed, which is maybe something to think about too.
Sure. In general, I think there's just the theme of like a little bit more transparency on like what the application process looks and feels like for a client, and ensuring that that UX actually improves, so that clients that are worthy of receiving DataCap do get it in a reliable manner. And like notaries in a way are held accountable for like serving as fiduciaries to the network and enabling the success of clients.
I definitely recommend any notary who hasn't already done it to apply for DataCap. It'll give you a sense of the usability. So yeah, and then 104 is just a recommendation on future notaries that we should have them, and actually gave me an idea for a third thing, but so they should add an anticipated response time and throughput to their application. So basically they should say like how much work are they going to put into being a notary, and how many applications can we expect them to be able to deal with, because it may influence who we want to accept as notaries. And then the third one that you maybe realize is just we should include an anticipated start date, because some notaries may build new technology in order to deploy the notary that they're imagining, and it may take them 3 months, but they're not going to build it unless they get approved. But that can actually work. We can work with that and make that possible. But so just extending the application to do those things. But the first two criteria are just like, yeah, how many applications are you going to be able to deal with, and how quickly do you think that you can respond to each one, so that then we can hold them accountable if in some months' time they just have a giant bottleneck and they've only let 2 applications through, they're not actually living up to their application.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting about notary selection in Filecoin Plus today is it's based on this like very quantified rubric, right? Where like based on how you score on certain parameters, it spits out a number that effectively defines like your ranking in a set of like notaries. And adding in like a parameter like this, actually, I'm wondering if another way to look at this is maybe there's an expectation that like here's a minimum response, like a maximum response time and like a minimum throughput. And before you even like self-select yourself into being a notary, you should be comfortable like meeting these requirements. Because my fear is that we'll end up having, like, I don't want it to negatively affect the fluidity of DataCap in certain regions versus others, or in certain cases of notaries versus others, because that may then influence like how quickly a certain notary needs to be like topped up versus others, for example. And so
the only pushback I'd have there is like what kind of projects they're aiming to focus on. Because if you're aiming to focus on like just making something up, you want to focus on early stage startups with like 1 to 5 terabyte data cap. You might imagine that you can get 300 of them a year, 1,000 of them a year. But then somebody else who wants to focus on hackathon teams or school groups or things like that, maybe they're imagining thousands of smaller data caps. So they're not, I don't think it's easy to call them equal.
Yeah. That's really fair. Curious to hear if there's any other opinions from, especially from other notaries in the call. Chat's been pretty silent.
I mean, I get part.
I was just going to say, I don't know the steps for updating that application rubric. So I just opened this ticket to get it in discussion. So I don't know the next steps here.
So the next steps for adjusting the rubric are actually very similar, where instead of opening a discussion thing, you'd actually just create a modification issue where you'd propose a change to the rubric. And then we can have a conversation on the tactical changes. I think once we hear maybe a few more opinions and probably like the next governance call, like anybody can help with like what the implementation may look like, because people might have different ideas on how that gets represented on the rubric or on the application. And so we should, I think it'd be good to just align on like what are the parameters we want to include. So it sounds like there's at least 2, if not 3, that we've mentioned today, Andrew. There's probably more as like more conversation happens. And then like the representation on the app and the rubric. I sort of view that as like a, once this is resolved and once we're aligned, that's like the more like tactical, like does it get represented in the scoring even, or is it just part of the application and part of the expectations that we set up? Because there's a different angle to this where like I don't know if we should disqualify somebody from like picking a use case that's more or less requiring like a serving of a different rate, but as long as they're serving a diverse use case or able to like adequately provide data cap for a different kind of use case and do it in a way that is adequate for that use case. I'm using a lot of this and that, but yeah.
I could tell you one way that, sorry, Jonathan, one last thing. One way I'd imagine that you'd add this to the rubric is to say, okay, if you imagine a throughput of 1 deal a week and an average deal size of 1 terabyte, then you're talking, don't give them a data cap of over 52 terabytes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in a way, changing the metric to, well, I shouldn't say changing, but introducing this concept of like the flow rate of data cap effectively as like part of how like an allocation happens.
Yeah, so something like that.
Yeah,
I'm not certain. There's more thinking needed here, but
yeah, but I think one of the interesting things that does also is it gives a lot more predictability to the ecosystem on when we need to do like new elections, for example, because you can now foresee better. Like if we have data on how quickly notaries think they're going to run out of data cap, that like makes it a lot more predictable and a lot more fluid to then say, oh, like the time's coming up for like topping a particular notary like application up, or time to do another round of like elections for notaries effectively. And so it does introduce a little bit more predictability in the system. So I think that's pretty interesting. Jonathan, you still have your hand. Sorry, Andrew, what'd you say?
Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think like one of the things that is challenging, which I don't know, maybe we are at a place, I think it's still early, where like, I don't know if many notaries can predict what like their average throughput should be. I do like the idea though of saying like how many hours or like some sort of metric of like how much you can like spend to like review. Because like the other thing that like we don't have to keep the way that it is like how do we think about, sorry, this is just New York in the background. How do we think about like the number of notaries per region? And so like if you had, like another way of looking at this is like if you have the number of hours like notaries are working or something, like the US could have a bunch of part-time notaries that like sum up to like fulfilling equal to like what a full-time notary might be doing in Europe or something. And so like another way that we could think about this problem is like if we have a sense of like how much, not even like what is the expected like I'm hesitant to say like people like forecasting their data cap, because I don't know if anyone can do that really well, like until we actually see like requests that are coming through. But I do think like in terms of at least like the sizing of like how many notaries, it should be based on like how much effort people can like put in, so that we have like some distribution. And then I don't know, maybe it is also like figuring out how to tune like the allocation number.
Cool. Yeah. I do think there's plenty of more conversation to be had on this, but I think the general direction like certainly makes sense. We're 2 minutes from wrapping up, so I'm going to continue pushing the conversation to the next topics. Andrew, thanks for sharing. I think you had the question of like tactical next steps for like the rubric change. Are you good on that? Okay, perfect. So then there was this issue on actual decision making and governance where somebody proposed like having a tribunal of Filecoin plus stakeholders. So this issue was actually created under Lotus. And so the ask to the person that filed this would also be to open this under like the the Notary governance repo, so that we can have a discussion there. But yeah, if you're on the call and want to talk it through, it would be great. If not, the ask to those of you that are in the call would be to take a look at this and see if you have an opinion, if you find this to be interesting. I'm going to write a comment on this real quick to see if we can migrate the conversation over to the Notary governance repo. But I did think it was an interesting conversation and worth having as we think about ways in which we can continue to make changes and iterate in the ecosystem. Quick TLDR on this was basically to have some sort of process by which we could actually make faster decisions and then implement those decisions in a way that was like quote unquote fair. Cool. All right, and then last up, I think we already did a quick plug on if there's any ideas for additional tooling and dashboards. The only other thing worth adding is Jonathan Schwartz opened up an issue where DataCap was accidentally granted to via the verify.glyph.io as he was testing something, and so he's written up a quick description of what happened and why it was an issue and why it won't be an issue. So if for those of you that are curious and want to continue contributing to additional transparency in the system and helping resolve issues in a way that are good and productive, I would recommend taking a look at issue 1 or 2 and figuring out some next steps there. With that, I did want to, right as we hit time, are there any burning topics that anybody wants to bring up? Would be great to hear. If not, we'll call it. So I'll give a couple of minutes in case there's anything anybody wants to mention. For those of you that could make it, thank you so much for being here. Awesome to see the community and the engagement continue to grow bi-weekly over bi-weekly.
Actually, I do have some questions. I just got on. I thought maybe I got mixed up. So you started an hour ago?
I think it's because of daylight savings time.
Oh.
Like we should have anticipated this. I think it's completely fair. Yeah, we're Dr. Shid, we're just wrapping up. No worries. Of course, this will be recorded and uploaded. But yeah, if you had any topics that you wanted to have some discussion on, it might be worth doing them in Slack. Just opening up a few threads and we can have people engage there. Or if there are substantive changes to the ecosystem, as usual, I would recommend just opening up an issue in GitHub.
Okay. Is there any way I can contact any one of you? Like Jonathan, Victor, is he there?
Yeah, JV is in the call right now. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, JV, I posted some question on LinkedIn for you. If you could kindly respond that. I posted 2 weeks ago for you.
It looks like he's actually just dropped off the call. But okay, I can ping him. I can ping him and see. Thank you for flagging that.
Okay, so can I have your LinkedIn?
Me?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. If you just look up Deep Kapoor, you'll find me on LinkedIn. Happy to respond to stuff there. But of course, if it relates to Filecoin Plus, much happier to have the conversation in Slack as well. I have the same name in Filecoin Slack. You can find me there, or we can just chat on the Filecoin Plus channel as well.
Okay. I'll post a question for you now on this thing. Maybe you can. Okay. Hey, awesome.
Deep, I have one question. If I can steal 30 seconds of your time. As you're probably aware, Philip is out of DataCap at the moment. So is there any notary here around who can take over from him for my DataCap? Because I'm waiting at the moment. And I don't want to spam GitHub for 30 notaries. So if somebody is willing, can you please raise a hand so I know who to contact tomorrow when it's daytime again here?
Yeah, I guess that's a great question for the notaries. If there's anybody that wants to nominate themselves for receiving another application. I know Neo mentioned that he's certainly down for more applications to come his way.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
That's a good
I can
place
do
to
that.
start.
Yeah, Neo, I will contact you then.
No
Thanks,
problem.
man.
No worries.
All right, folks, with over the hour, I'm going to call it here. Thank you so much for coming. It looks like some people are still joining the meeting, so I do think that the time swap, messed some stuff up. But hopefully things will be more consistent, at least for the next few months, before we go through another one of these changes. Have a wonderful week ahead of you, and looking forward to catching up at the next one of these. Thanks so much. Take care.